Do you want to see how we paint a wound that goes from this to this? Do you want to know how a color wheel is going to save your butt? Well, stick around on this episode of Off the Walls Effects and you'll find out. Hi, my name is Adam Walls and I'm an award-winning makeup artist. You may have seen my work in seasons 1 and 2 of The Purge. Are you curious about how to use a color wheel to color correct your prosthetic? Let's go have some fun. In one of my last videos, I actually timed myself applying 2 different types of transfers. One was clear and one was tinted. And the whole point of that was to see how much time you can save when you don't have to worry about color correction. Although sometimes you're given a prosthetic that doesn't exactly match your actor's skin tone, and you're kind of just stuck rolling with it. In those cases, it's really important to know how to color correct a prosthetic. Sure, you could just look at somebody's skin and say, hey, you're white, or hey, you're black, and then grab a generic corresponding color, but those colors never exactly match your actor's skin tone. What you really need to be looking for is those underlying tones. As a makeup artist, that's what you need to be able to recognize. Look at me, for instance. I have lots of red, and I have lots of olive in my skin. Those are my underlying skin tones. And as a makeup artist, you need to be able to recognize that in your talent when they sit in your chair. So in today's video, we're going to use a color wheel to do just that. And we're going to fix that god-awful paint job I did in that previous video. So go ahead and strap in, grab those color wheels, and let's go have some fun with this. So before I get into any sort of color correcting, I just want to show you a little trick. When I ran my transfer, I actually caught a couple little air bubbles in it when I ran the appliance. Instead of just tossing the appliance and trying to run it again, I wanted to show you how you can fix that. I'm using one of my pointed sculpting tools and dipping it into some 99% alcohol, that way it won't stick to the prosthetic, to pop those bubbles. Next I used the same Prosthetic cream that I ran the prosthetic from to fill all those holes. Now honestly, I could just use regular Prosthetic cream, but since I already had this tinted version, I'm going to use that instead. Now keep in mind that this glue is water soluble, and you can use water to thin and smooth out your patches. Soak up a little water with a makeup wedge, and you can kind of brush that over your patches to give you a smooth surface. I always joke that Prosthetic cream is kind of like the spackle of makeup effects. If you have a hole, or if you have something that needs a patch, you can use Prosthetic cream and just kind of brush it, wipe it, or get it in there with your spatula to cover up any sort of weird spots that you find. Once you're happy with your patches, you get out your hair dryer or a fan and dry your patches. Now they won't be 100% dried, but that outer layer will be. The inside will continue to dry as you paint everything up. Next, we go ahead and get some Prosthetic out and we stipple that around the prosthetic. Remember that this stippled coat of Prosthetic is how we actually get our transfer to stick to the water slide paper. After everything's got a nice coat of Prosthetic on it, get your hair dryer back out and make sure everything is nice and dry. Remember, the Prosthetic will go clear once it's dried. After we've stippled on our Prosthetic, now it's time to stick our prosthetic down onto the water slide paper. Make sure to work from the center out because you don't want to catch any sort of weird wrinkle lines in your acetate. Cut out your prosthetic using a wiggly line that we love so much. Clean your skin, peel it, and of course stick your prosthetic down. Get your water back out because we're going to soak that paper and we're going to let it sit there for about 20 seconds. And after that time has elapsed, go ahead and peel it back and you'll have your prosthetic securely attached to your skin. If needed, you can use a little bit of 99% alcohol and go around the edge of the prosthetic. What I'm doing is I'm making sure there isn't any extra Prosthetic out there on the sides that are going to cause any issues or possibly catch a little glare. Next, we're going to be using our complexion palette and our light skin illustrator palette to paint everything up. And of course, there's our color wheel. Because the prosthetic is on the yellowy orangey side, you might think I'd immediately go with that blue-green. You very well could start out there, but in this case, as I was saying earlier, you want to identify the skin undertones of your actor, and in my case, I have a lot of red and green undertones. So I'm going to start out with those colors. I'm going to add those mauvey, red, orangey, purple undertones as a good base layer. You can see me going around and covering the entire prosthetic. And as I do, you can see me blending in those red and orange colors. Of course, that's a little too red for our purposes, so I'm going to go in with our green, which of course is across from red on that color wheel. As we start to add that next color, can you see how that green starts to neutralize things pretty effectively? Once I get my undertones painted, I start going in with kind of a generic skin tone. I just kind of pepper that over the top just a little bit, just to kind of break up what we have working underneath. I love stippling color because skin isn't just one solid color, it's a bunch of different colored speckles and spots. As I continue on, you can see that the appliance is now starting to kind of go in that orangey yellowy direction. So to counteract that, across on that orange and yellow is the blue-green. Cool Tone out of the complexion palette is a perfect color for this because it's a really cool blue-green sort of color, and you can see how it really mellows things out a little bit. After you get that in there, you can kind of ping-pong back and forth between those colors on opposite ends of the color wheel. It's a really good way of making sure that everything blends into the skin pretty naturally. After you've bounced back and forth between these colors, you can kind of take a moment and lean back, blur your vision, and see if anything catches your eye. You're looking for anything that pops out, almost as if the color has a kind of day glow sort of color to it. That's usually the next thing that I like to paint. And so, in this case, those orangey reds were catching my eye. Of course, to counteract that, green will do the trick. You'll notice that I'm using the same stipple technique with these colors again. I'm just trying to pepper these little dots and of all these different colors in there to really make things look natural. Now things are starting to look a little too orangey and a little too yellowy, and that means that we can bounce back across the color wheel and go back to our Cool Tone. Notice how all those areas suddenly become a little less hot looking? At this point, the base color is looking good, so I'm going to move on and kind of lighten up a couple of the little darker areas that are catching my eye. In order to lighten those spots and break up some of that color, I'll use a very light rice paper out of the Skin Illustrator palette. This is a really good color for lightening in any areas and also helps to add breakup that the skin naturally has. Now I'm pretty comfortable with how that's looking, so let's go ahead and paint up the wound. Of course, I jump in with my aged blood, which is honestly my favorite color, and I use it for just about everything, and I fill in that wound detail. Once I have my aged blood painted into the wound details, my next color is Ultra Blue. I mentioned this in my transfer video, but I'll say it again. The Ultra Blue is great for creating shadows. That blue will go slightly purple, and that's okay. It'll give a dark, bruisey vibe, and honestly, in real life, people would naturally have some sort of bruising in and around a wound like this, so it's kind of serving a dual purpose for us. Once I'm set with that, I go ahead with my little rice paper highlight, which is probably my favorite part of the process, and I go ahead and punch up those little edges here and there, really giving it some contrasting depth. If you concentrate those highlights right next to a dark shadow, that contrast helps to make your prosthetic look deeper than it actually is. You're just playing with the illusion a little bit. Now I'm adding some of that red irritation around the wound. You definitely want to add that around your wounds, and this one didn't have enough of it. After punching up that irritation, I go back in with my aged blood and I give it a little speckling around the wound itself. You don't want just one solid color of red around your wound because it just doesn't look realistic. So if you add those little speckles and you add that breakup, there's a rawness to it that really helps to sell the effect. Now that I'm happy with wound coloring, I'm taking a moment to go back and squint my eyes again. Can you see that hyperglow sort of hot spot in the center? I'm going to go back with my Cool Tone and counteract that orangey yellowy hot spot that I was seeing. Once that Cool Tone gets added, notice that all of a sudden it's like the prosthetic settles down and it starts to blend in and look a little bit more natural with the skin. That's the magic about these corrective colors and playing with the color wheel like this. It's a great way to think about how to solve the problem of making your prosthetic look like your skin. Once that's all done, we go ahead and get our sealer out and give it a good solid coat. I like to use the EVA Pro Seal, and in this case it's a matte version of the sealer. With many of these sealers, they're not always as matte as you'd like, so here's a little trick. You can actually use Monostat Shaping Gel, which is a powder gel that will take that sheen away. This is a great little trick to use on transfers like this and also works great for things like tattoos. Primarily, this works well because Prosade tends to be shiny when it dries, so these tricks will help with that. Unfortunately though, you're going to notice in just a second that there's an issue with it. After I apply the blood, I'm going to spray this with a little bit of water, and unfortunately that chafing gel has a silicone base to it, meaning the water is going to bead up on it unnaturally. Go ahead and wipe off that chafing gel, that way the water and the blood can flow a little bit more naturally and won't bead up. Once you're happy with your dress blood, go ahead and get your hair dryer out and dry the blood. The blood we're using is actually Fleet Street, and it's a drying blood. So once it's dried, it doesn't move, and as you can see, I'm kind of poking it with my finger, and it's not budging. So there you go. That's color correcting with a color wheel in a nutshell. Just remember to keep that wheel in mind when painting up your prosthetics, and you should have no problem in matching a prosthetic to your actor's skin. Alright, so that's going to wrap things up for us. Hope you had fun and hope you learned a little something. And if so, give the video a like and consider subscribing to Off the Walls Effects for more updates. If you do decide to paint in the future with a color wheel, let me know in the comments down below. In the meantime, hang in there and keep making cool stuff.